Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to OPD's planning webinars, our plan lunches at noon. Today, we're going to be putting your master plan to work. So before we begin, I want to have please turn off your cameras and please mute your microphones. Just wanted to let you know that this is being recorded and it will be available on our website in a few days with the slides and the presentation. So today, if you're not familiar with how our webinars work, you could use the chat function for questions, which is up at the top of your screen. The menu on the top of your screen has icons for chat. And please, again, make sure that you have your cameras off and you are muted. So, in having said that, as we're getting ready to go, there will be question and answer towards the end. So if you have a question, feel free to use the chat. And with that being said, I will turn it over to Tara. Tara
No,
Bamford
I'm having trouble advancing slides now, for some reason. You need to give me permission to share again.
Okay. Those of you just joining, please turn off your videos and please turn off your microphones. How you doing now, Tara?
Oh, you tell me.
Go ahead and share.
Yeah. It's not letting me now for some reason. It's telling me only meeting organizers and presenters can share.
I've just made you.
All right.
There we go. Okay.
Now,
Thank you for your patience.
Gas, as my sister used to say.
Thank you, everyone. The modern age of virtual learning.
So the first lesson was patience. So thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me to speak about master plans today.
Thank you.
Some of you know me and know master plans are my favorite thing to work on and talk about. I've been a planner in New Hampshire since 1988. First at Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission, where I was executive director for a time, and then as lead planner at North Country Council for 10 years. In recent years, I've been working directly one-on-one with communities. As you can imagine, after 30 or so years of helping communities develop and update their plans, I have a few ideas on best practices to share with you today. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is the importance of developing a plan with implementation in mind. Are you building a car to drive, or are you building a model car to display? The purpose of your master plan is to articulate the community's vision for the future and recommend steps to guide future growth and development in that direction. So it needs to be written with that in mind. Getting the plan done can seem daunting at times, but it's not the end goal. The master plan is your guide to what needs to happen in the next 10 years or so to bring the community in the direction desired by residents, so that the big decisions are made proactively rather than reactively. To do this, recommendations have to be realistic, but even more important, they need to be supported by the community. So you need community engagement for direction at the beginning and for feedback along the way. The public needs to see a connection between the input they gave, the recommendations in the plan, and later on the town meeting items they're asked to vote on. I always say my best master plans are the ones where implementation started before the plan was even done. That's not because I'm a planning wizard, but because if you build on a spark that's already there, something great that's already going on in the community, you'll have much more chance of success. And look around to see what's worked in other communities. If you don't have a professional planner, some good sources are Stephanie and the others in the state planning office, your regional planning commission, and use the web. Look at other town plans. There's a website called New Worldism that's all case studies of some successful community-driven initiatives. That's also a good resource. To find it, you would Google NECAPA New Worldism. That's NNECAPA for the Northern New England chapter of the APA. And that should bring you right to it. And finally, if you want people to implement your plan, you have to make it readable, focused, and attractive. Part of having a plan readable is how you organize it. It needs to tell a story. This is how the enabling statute talks about the sections of the master plan. It doesn't mean you organize the document like this. And we also would like you to ignore the fact that only 1 and 2, the vision and land use, are required, because the implementation section is the most important part, and that's what we're here to emphasize today. So this is what I would do if I arrived on the scene to update your plan and the previous one looked like this, because I want it to tell this story. What are the community's vision and goals? What do we have to work with? That's a big one. This means both socioeconomics and land. Who lives in the town? What's going on economically with families, with the tax base, with jobs? What do you have for housing? What are the important natural resource areas that are more value to the community protected rather than developed? What areas are not suitable for development? What's going on with existing land use and what are the trends? Then explore the options. That's where planners and other communities come in handy. Develop your future land use plan from that, and then think about what the transportation and community facility needs associated with that plan will be. And then, of course, the big one, who needs to do what? And we'll come back to that. 2 extremes I've run into over the years on planning boards are the ones who say, it'll never happen, but let's put it in the plan anyway. Who cares? It's just a plan. And then on the other end of the spectrum are the ones that say, how can we include that recommendation? We don't have enough data, but our survey wasn't statistically significant. Oh my goodness. Well, first, if you don't think it's going to happen, you didn't do your homework in terms of community engagement, and you need to go back to the drawing board. Lofty ideals belong in the vision and goals, but the action item steps need to be right-sized for your community. For example, one way to find out what's right-sized might be for a community interested in protecting natural resources that also has a strong focus on private property rights, which is most communities in New Hampshire. You might include a survey question that asks what the right approach would be for each type of natural resources, ranging from restricting development to managing impacts of development to public education. And that will guide you to right-size recommendations so that they will happen. Recommendations need to be supported in the text, of course, by results of public engagement and data, but don't be anxious about the volume or quality of data you have. The connection just needs to be reasonable. And recommending further study isn't always a cop-out either. Sometimes it's the next logical step in a process and can be a step toward implementing your plan. Having that recommendation for further study in your master plan can often help you obtain funding and technical assistance later. For example, you might want to recommend something like storing your village area, but not be sure it'll be possible without a feasibility study. Or you might suspect your water lines are leaking and want to you know, you want to recommend replacement, but you're not sure. So you want to recommend a study as a first step. A common thing now is to recommend a covered inventory, because that's a first step to prioritize replacements for transportation infrastructure, for flood safety, for habitat connectivity. Sometimes it makes sense to dig deeper into an issue during the process in order to make sure implementation will happen. During work on the 2015 Carroll Master Plan, it became apparent that one of the biggest issues in town was whether to replace or rehabilitate the town hall. The town hall was an icon for the town center and the focal point for town activity. It's probably familiar to many of you who've been to Bretton Woods or a conference at the Mount Washington Hotel, and you may have noticed it's gone. It was very expensive to heat, poorly configured, many spaces were not accessible and couldn't really be fixed. We decided in the midst of that master plan that we needed to dig deeper into the issue. So we had a workshop to focus just on the question of the role of the town hall. We wanted to move people away from the emotional attachment we all have to our iconic town buildings and focus on what really needed to happen there. So 5 years later, it's been replaced by a new town office. A new public safety building has also been constructed on the site to replace a fire station they'd grown out of and a rented police station. I'm sure this implementation, this big step of implementing the master plan, would not have happened if we hadn't stepped aside to do some additional engagement in the middle of the process. Another example of that approach that came to mind when I was thinking about today was the Easton town plan. I've been around so long that I've updated the town plan I wrote for them 10 or so years ago, but I'm talking about the one 10 or so years ago. I was enthusiastically telling the planning board all about the great things they could do using the innovative zoning statute and the guidebook we just produced on that. And they were saying, well, so-and-so's never going to go for that kind of thing. And the planning board members made clear to me that so-and-so was an opinion leader. If we had him, we had it in the bag. So we organized a public workshop just to talk about the innovative zoning tools. We made sure to schedule it when this gentleman could attend and ask any questions he had. We had a great conversation. He learned, I learned, and the year after the plan was adopted, town meeting approved all 4 of the proposed innovative zoning amendments that were recommended in the town plan. The lesson in there is if you want your plan to be implemented, engage the opinion leaders in the process. Engage the people who are most likely to have concerns about the steps you're thinking of recommending, and be a good listener. I think the town of Gorham's a great example of harnessing existing momentum, not just because I think my client, the planning board chair, is present today. While I was helping the planning board with their master plan update, someone kind of mentioned as an aside how they'd recently become just the 2nd community in New Hampshire to be designated by the AT as an Appalachian Trail community. I said, why haven't I heard anything about this? This is a big deal. Guiding theme for a master plan can really help with implementation by generating enthusiasm and helping everyone see they're working toward a common goal. In Gorham, the planning board recognized that trails are an economic driver and a big draw of quality of life for families and young individuals who can telecommute or might want to start a business. The ATV industry has been a real boost for certain local businesses and the real estate sales. This new energy and the Appalachian Trail Community designation both provided some forward momentum to build on. So we made it the theme of the plan, the common thread tying economic development and transportation and other topics together. And a lot's happened already. Gorham was one of only 10 communities nationwide to be awarded an EPA Recreation Economy for Rural Communities Technical Assistance Grant. Associated with that came National Park Service, Recreation Trails and Conservation Assistance Program technical assistance. We now have a community action plan for boosting the recreation economy. This cool new logo, a design for wayfinding signs. And with one of the grants, they were able to scope out a grant application for improving the sidewalks, bike lanes, traffic calming to tie their walkable downtown together with these trail systems. And that became the highest rated project in the region for the 10-year plan and made it to the governor's proposed 10-year plan. So this is what this thought process might look as an outline for a plan. It's not, I don't think I've ever done exactly the same outline for any two communities, but this is kind of where my thinking starts. You might want to break out certain topics that are especially important to the town in their own chapters and provide a more detailed action plan for those. An example would be economic development in a town trying to reinvent its economy, like many in New Hampshire are still trying to do after the loss of manufacturing jobs. Or I'm working on a plan now for a resort community, and we're going to have a really robust recreation chapter. But I think telling the story in as concise and readable way as possible goes a long way toward implementation. Don't include 25 pages on something just because you can. And it's also a bit of an iterative process. You need to look at the public input to know what the focus of the plan should be, and the data, of course. Then tailor the level of detail to those issues with less detail on less important issues. For years, I've had people tell me with surprise that they enjoyed reading the draft master plan for the hearing. For many, that's your one shot at sharing your story with the public. Most people outside of local government are never going to look at that document again. But the story will stick with them when they're asked to vote on implementation steps later. So now for the who needs to do what, the implementation plan. Sometimes planning boards want to talk about timeframes for recommendations and put them in other categories like priority. In my experience, it's really wasted energy to put this kind of time and energy into the action plan. Things aren't going to get implemented according to the time frame that you might spend a couple of months getting to that granular level and the priorities you put in. Other factors are going to drive implementation, like funding sources and staffing. So this is another thing that I would just get rid of when I see it. If you've worked with me, you know I like to keep things simple. What is the action item? Who needs to take the lead to make this happen? And who else has a role to play? This is how, these are the only headings I would have in your action plan. So those are my thoughts on how to build a master plan for implementation. Now let's look at some of the tools for implementation. We're gonna take a shot at crowdsourcing this if possible, because you probably have some to add to. This is the list off the top of my head. So I'm gonna invite you to put additional tools you've had success with in the chat, and Stephanie will hop in and share those with us. And I'm going to add them to the presentation material before it gets posted online, so that these lists will represent all of our input. In the interest of time, let's try to stick to tools rather than agencies and funding sources, though. I will be putting a few of those in the notes fields in the material that Stephanie will be posting next week. So some of the tools for implementing natural resources recommendations, off the top of my head, the obvious ones like land acquisition, conservation easements, partnerships are really important with, you know, from land trust to watershed groups.
Hi, how are you?
public education is, one that I can think of where that's usually the recommendation is wildlife. There's a lot of information out there on how to make sure that your yard doesn't detract from the wildlife's natural patterns. Lighting might be as well. Overlay zoning, many of you have overlay districts in your zoning for steep slopes, wetlands, shoreline, groundwater protection, especially in your wellhead protection areas. Where you put development on the land goes a long way toward protecting natural resources, whether it's lot size averaging with just a couple lots, or clustering, or a large conservation subdivision. The current use program is still a huge help, along with the land use change tax associated with it that funds a lot of the acquisition and easement. I often put enforcement as a recommendation. DES is pretty understaffed. Towns can help be the eyes and ears. Then there are ways to work with other communities on a shared resource, like greenways, corridor plans, watershed plans. You may not think about it when you're writing your plan, but a household hazardous waste collection goes a long way toward protecting water quality. Stephanie, are there any others in the chat? Not hearing Stephanie.
Hi, Tara. This is Jennifer Gilbert. I think we lost Stephanie. But I see that we have something in the chat regarding natural resource implementation.
Okay.
Adds citizen monitoring, streams, lakes, that may be important for later decision making.
Yep.
That's the only one so
Great.
far.
Thanks for hopping in to help out. All right, great. I'll add that before these are posted. So next category I thought about, and a lot of times scenic and historic are dumped in with natural resources, but the tools can be a little different. So I broke this out. The first bunch of the list are really for either scenic or historic, because there's a lot of overlap between those. Acquisition, easements, we all think about conservation easements, but easements can be scenic easements, they can be preservation easements. Partnerships are hugely important. I'm always surprised when I learn that planning board members don't know their town is on a scenic byway. Scenic byway program is something to take advantage of. Local scenic roads ordinance is really for scenic and historic preservation, because that's what the stone walls are about. Same with historic districts. We appreciate the aesthetics of those and the barns. And for scenic, there's also ridgeline zoning, clustering, because our open fields are important foregrounds to our mountain views. Current use program, again, for the same reason, the fields are important. And for historic, there are tax benefits associated with the national and state registers, and there's funding associated with the certified local government program. Are there any others in the chat, Jennifer?
No, I don't see any more in the chat. Oh, actually, sorry. Somebody had posted, we actually put up a warrant article last year to create a water committee, which overwhelmingly passed.
Right, I'll add that back to natural resources.
And then we also just got a question about what is ridgeline zoning?
So on the State Planning Office website, under tools, if you look for innovative zoning guidebook, you'll see a model that is aimed at managing the appearance of development on higher elevations or ridgelines. It's not so much what you would build up there, but things like making sure that the building site has some screening from trees to when viewed from down below, and that there isn't, you know, a ton of reflective glass. I think you've all, you know, been able to see driving by a lake and you look across onto the hillsides and it's like, wow, what an eyesore, and it doesn't need to be that way. So that's what ridgeline zoning is aimed at. I'm going to put some links to more information about these in the notes field on the slides before they're posted as well. So people will be able to follow up and look into these more. So zoning amendments, many master plans are just not connected to the zoning very well. And it's the primary purpose of the master plan is to guide the future development of the town. That's why the land use section is one of the required elements. But when I go to help people update their plans, I often see the master plan says we want a dense, vibrant village area or downtown and rural character out around it, but the zoning is having the opposite effect. The zoning has setbacks in the village larger than anything I see there. Parking's allowed in front. Large lot sizes are forcing sprawl in the rural areas. Or another common example is we want to increase housing opportunities, but then the zoning doesn't allow unconventional housing arrangements or detached accessory dwelling units. So your zoning amendment is your primary tool for implementing your master plan. Subdivision and site plan regs also can benefit from another look after the master plan. Hazard mitigation plans. Many planning boards are unaware that there are recommendations for them in the hazard mitigation plan. Always, that's a tool for implementation. Thinking about housing, there's inclusionary housing, housing commissions. For economic development, TIF districts, where the increased value of the development that resulted from the improvement pays back the bond. Collaboration, you know, it's not wrong to collaborate with your major employers and ask what they need to continue to grow. Excavation regulations have a big impact on land use. We're seeing in the short, although this could change, right now the short-term rental situation, the 4111C business regulations are getting a lot of new look. Capital improvement program is a land use tool. Where you put your facilities has a big impact on development, as do transportation improvements, flexible parking rather than requiring a big oversized parking lot or making an area pedestrian friendly. All huge impacts on land use. Do we see any more land use tools in the chat?
This is Jennifer. No, there's no more chats. And Stephanie is back on after her laptop crashed.
Yes. Hello, everyone. That was very surprising, so I apologize.
We're okay. Jennifer hopped in for you, so good. We just
Thank
kept
you.
on rolling. So we're on transportation. The tool that gets the most press is the 10-year plan. You want to work with your Regional Planning Commission's Transportation Advisory Committee to make sure any big projects get on the state's 10-year plan for how federal transportation dollars are spent. The road standards in your subdivision regulations have a huge impact on land use. You might recommend a road inventory and needs assessment to establish priorities for road improvements. Driveway regulations, don't forget those, many are out of date. Traffic calming and access management are such important tools for land use and transportation that I often put those details right in the plan. Capital improvement program, of course, for scheduling the local funding for transportation improvements. Don't forget the non-drivers when you think about transportation, the pedestrian bicycle infrastructure, include outreach on services that are out there for non-drivers might be a recommendation, or forming a community driver volunteer program. Everybody's transportation needs to be in there. Stephanie, are there any transportation tools in the chat?
I don't. I think that it looks like, I assume you're all caught up with the chat. I see no transportation questions or hand raising for in the chat.
Okay.
For transportation.
Community facilities. This is most importantly where we talk about the capital improvements program. Just a quickie on that. A lot of planning boards don't remember how the CIP came about, but the RSA says you can do this two ways. Town meeting can do this two ways. You can either give it to the planning board as a responsibility, or to the select board to appoint a CIP committee. It's important to know which approach you're supposed to be taking there. And then most of these other things would be part of your capital improvement program. Land acquisition, of course, for future facilities. Partnerships, we don't think about partnerships an awful lot in community facilities, but it can be a huge tool. The Lisbon Lions Club, for example, sponsors the K-6 recreation and provides some of the facilities. Changes to a water and sewer rate structure can be important tools. Changes to the land use regulations can be tools related to community facilities. Making the most of the service area that you have for water and sewer, for example. Many village areas are underdeveloped. They've been allowed to develop with single-family homes, large lots, big setbacks. Why not think about minimum density and maximum lot size in your service areas to make the use of those facilities? Feasibility studies can be a huge tool toward implementing the master plan. Gee, we'd like to have a sewer, but can we? Is there anywhere to put that? Studies to prioritize water and sewer line replacements might be another step in that direction. Stephanie, are there any other tools on facilities in the chat?
Let's see, we have some. There was a Warren article last year that a community created a water committee, which was overwhelmingly passed. Actually, we do have a question as a little bit of a sidebar, and I'm just catching up, but Tara, could you explain what ridgeline zoning is?
Yeah, we did that.
If you could explain just a brief definition of what that is?
We did that. Jennifer passed those along.
Oh, okay. There's, so where did we leave off?
Well, just if there were any on community facilities or transportation.
I see you addressed the Conservation Commission, and there was innovative zoning guidebook information, and then there was the a cost of community services study. Was something that a community looks like they had done. And that looks like the rest of the chat.
Great, thank you. So this is the most important thing to take away today is how to keep the action plan on the radar. My recommendation for doing that is to have an annual meeting, maybe right after town meeting, when new board members hop in, have the planning board, select board, conservation commission town manager, administrator, other key local leaders, like maybe if you have a Department of Public Works, go right through the action plan and look at what has been accomplished. Don't be afraid to talk about what didn't go well and why, and what should the priorities, next steps be for everybody in the coming year. Everybody should leave this meeting with their game plan for the coming year. And you don't always think about so many of the things that you do during the year are implementing the master plan. But we don't hold it in our hands and think about it like that, and we should. Some communities have the master plan committee be a standing committee or subcommittee of the planning board. And then this committee is charged with keeping, this master plan implementation committee is charged with keeping the recommendations on the radar. I think that's probably a fine way to do it. I would just be a little bit concerned that in creating a standalone committee, you want to make sure that other groups like the planning board and select board don't feel any less ownership or responsibility for the actual actions. I know that Wolfboro has one of these committees. I'd be interested to hear if anybody from Wolfboro is with us today, how that master plan implementation committee works and whether there are any other towns that have that. If you wanted to raise your hand or put it in the chat for Stephanie.
Yeah, we do have one question here. Is there any legal requirement that a planning board have an annual meeting like the town's annual meeting?
No, the legal requirement for a planning board is to meet monthly. But there's no legal requirement to actually look at the master plan, which is unfortunate.
Right, the RSA gives the guidance of how often it should be updated. If you haven't discussed that, since I missed some portions of this, but so yeah, thank you for the question.
So I guess the final point is be patient. Sometimes change comes very slowly, either because it requires so much investment or needs just the right ingredients. The timing needs to be just right. A new program or funding source can really fire things up, like hopefully we're going to see with the new federal infrastructure money. But if you don't plan for the change you want, you can't ever get there. You just have to put one foot in front of the other, and the master plan is your game plan. I just share one success story in the good things come to those who wait and take one step at a time. Claremont was the first master plan I ever wrote, the 1991 master plan. You know Claremont, you know it as a large historic mill district and a downtown with beautiful brick architecture. When I arrived on the scene, the last manufacturing business had recently left. I worked hard as a not that long out of school planner to convince city leaders that a mixed use redevelopment of this area was going to serve them better. They were reluctant. They leaning toward, their instinct was to hold on to the traditional commercial downtown zoning and industrially zoned mill district. But in the end, they did adopt the mixed use as a plan. Then nothing happened for 10 years, really, until a new city manager came on the scene with a new approach, leadership, and the ability to imagine a different future. When he arrived, city officials were about to demolish 3 of the mill buildings, and Guy Santagate convinced them not to do that. Here's the mill district in Claremont today. You can see the beautiful pedestrian linkages to the downtown. They've built a parking garage to serve this area, a pedestrian bridge to a visitor center across the river. There's a project taking kicking off shortly, I believe, to rehab another portion of one of the mill buildings to create 83 apartments. So it took a while, but if they hadn't had the plan and just dug in there and took one step at a time, it would still look like this, only dilapidated. Whereas now it's a happening place.
Tara, we did have a comment from an attendee that said that Temple has a community advisory committee that focuses on the goals of the master plan, and was interested in maybe utilizing the term for the master plan implementation committee. That way, they set up the committee as a collaborative so they could solicit the input of other, town department heads or other boards and other committees in the town, which I think is important for your master plan implementation and any kind of discussion with the master plan, as you've spoken about. Is it's important to get all, as many stakeholders as you can, and preferably not just the municipal stakeholders. There's a lot of value in your community members to be involved and let them in the door so they see actually how town government works and how the process all kind of gets sifted out. So thank you very much for the compliment from Temple. So we do have a question here, if we can move right into that from the chat. If other towns are holding master plan committee meetings periodically to address whether recommendations are being implemented, I'd be interested in connecting with them. Or actually, Alton is going through the update process now, and we have discussed the idea of keeping the master plan committee active and also meeting periodically with our CIP and our zoning amendment committee to review the recommendations. I think that's great. I think that's kind of the purpose of the master plan, is to keep the CIP committee and the zoning amendment committee all talking with the master plan committee. I think that, the more communication with those committees for those documents, the better.
Yeah, perfect. So we'll go into Q&A in general in a second. I just wanted to touch on some of the keys to success in terms of implementation, and these resonate with me, but they weren't necessarily from me. A project I was involved in, we interviewed leaders of 20 successful local initiatives to ask them what their lessons learned were, and these 4 things kind of bubbled up to the top. And one, as Stephanie just touched on, is the relationship building and partnerships. That you need to work with the community to implement your plan, and to be adaptable, listen to what the community is saying. And in a few years, this recommendation might not be quite right. It's okay to learn as you go. Learning from other communities was one of the keys reported in terms of these successful local initiatives. We don't all live in a silo. We can learn from each other. And the final thing, I don't see this happening much in towns, and I'd really like to. And that's why I mentioned that almost everything we do really is implementing the master plan. Celebrate these small successes. When town meeting votes on some funding for some facility that was in the master plan, make the point with the public that was a master plan recommendation, and isn't this great? We're implementing our plan. It will really give it relevance to the community. Celebrate the small successes was something that these local leaders really emphasized. So that's it for me.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. Again, so we're moving into, anybody have any other questions? Please continue to use the chat, and we'll move right along here. Just as another comment, that Laconia has monthly master plan meetings with agendas, and right now they're focusing on their housing. So again, that's another, good thing. While every once in a while, maybe make it an annual habit when it's zoning amendment time to dust off the master plan and do a cross check and see, like Tara was just talking about, see if there's been any victories. If your community has put in for more parks and CIP is budgeting for it, and then next thing you know, your parks are completed or your sidewalk is completed, then absolutely celebrate and advertise those successes. But to make sure that all the documents are talking to each other for updates and to fulfill their intended purposes. So I think that's a great things to do is pat yourself on the back and advertise your victories. So again, if there's any other questions that anyone has, please put them in the chat. We have a comment about the innovative land use guide, and that is a subject that we are looking to update. So we will be working on that in the future. So thank you for that comment on the innovative land use guide.
Yeah, I worked on that, but I still use it a ton.
Yeah.
I've updated several of the models just for my own use, but it's still such a great resource for so many elements of your master plan.
Yeah. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, feel free again, we have a few more minutes to ask any questions. This webinar and the slides will be available in a few days on our website. We're still on our OSI website, but if you go to the planning division and training and into the training session, you'll see our YouTube channel and you'll see information with our slides and the recording of this webinar. So that'll be in a few days. And for those of you who have colleagues that missed it, just pay attention, keep checking. It'll be there in a couple of days. And again, we'll have our any other questions? Again, you have a few more minutes here for the chat. With these planning lunches at noon, the plan webinars are held monthly. Please keep up checking with our website for future topics, and previous recordings can be found again on our website. We're still under our OSI website, so please feel free to go to our website and our YouTube channel to look at previous recordings. There's recordings for new board members, there's planning board and zoning board sessions on there that we have for your reference. So please feel free to reach out to your colleagues if you've missed this or any other training you're interested in to visit our website.
I'd be interested in hearing from the folks in Temple and Laconia if they were still on and interested in unmuting themselves to talk about their master plan committees.
Is Temple and Laconia still on? I can't tell at this point. I can reach out to Temple.
This is Christine. Can you hear me?
As well as Laconia after the fact, and maybe we could set up a chat and see how they're doing it.
Yeah, it's something I'd like to learn more about, just for passing the information along to other communities.
Mm-hmm.
Christine from Temple is on. Did you want to say something, Christine?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can barely hear you, Christine.
Hang on, yeah, hang on a second.
I think my microphone is not working.
Yeah, it's not working too well, too, Christine. Sorry about that.
I'd be happy to talk if you want to email.
So if you didn't hear that, she said she'd be happy to talk if you want to talk by email. And she just put her email address in the chat.
Thank you, Christine.
Super. If somebody would, if you want to share that with me after, I'd like to learn more about, different approaches for keeping the master plan on the radar.
And again, as we have, everyone's talking about housing, and Laconia is just working on housing. So as communities are looking to expand their options, please keep in mind there are funding sources out there. Again, Plan New Hampshire has a great program, the Municipal Technical Assistance Grant Program. So for those of you who are looking for zoning changes and looking for resources to help with housing and other issues as well for zoning amendment time, please look into Plan New Hampshire and their Municipal Technical Assistance Grant Program. I want to thank Tara today for your help and putting together a great presentation. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I hope things went well and were uninterrupted. So if you have any questions, again, the chat is still open for a few more minutes. If you would like to let your colleagues know about the programs we have on our training website, feel free to do that. And again, I'm Stephanie Verdial. I'm a principal planner at OPD, and thank you for attending the planning webinar lunches. And we will, oh, wait a minute, we have one more coming in here. In Bethlehem, they put out a special exception criteria that must be in the intent of the master plan. Interesting. And how is that working out in Bethlehem? Oh, okay. So in Bethlehem, they had that criteria for the special exception to go into the master plan. They've only had one since then. It didn't apply, but it sounds like it may be a good program to have, and some good information is kind of that cross check that we talk about for the master plan work. So I think we could, I think the questions are pretty much done. I think we can wrap it up now. So again, thank you again for your time and your effort, Tara. I appreciate it. And you can always reach out to us at OPD for any further questions that you may have regarding this presentation. Or please, again, check out our website. And in a few days, this recording and the slides will be available for your reference. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, Stephanie.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for a good job.